I do have some templates to work from. I can work with the committee or your subcommittee for this, but they want to talk to you.
Did they get the impression that, did you get the impression from them that was because they have a list of project managers, or was there some other
They
issue?
inferred that, didn't state that categorically,
Okay.
but they also said that there were so many errors that districts were making that they wanted to have a sit-down.
Good.
And then they would allow you to then advertise it in the Central Register.
And Chuck Carucci's aware of that?
Yes,
Okay.
I told them that orally, and then they want you to use their evaluation criteria. I mean, they
Right.
have this set out in dire
Yeah,
detail.
we're willing to follow whatever whatever they set out. I mean,
Yes.
But the timetable's really tight, because as Cliff said, we have to hire the project manager, we have to get the architect on board.
But you have to hire a project manager first.
First, right.
And
Right.
then you go out
Yeah.
to.
And then move forward with the study itself, and then get the study approved, and then we have to go to town meeting for funding, and from town meeting, we have to go to an election, so I mean, it's pretty crammed up.
We can do it.
The hard part is getting to where the architect's on board.
Right.
And
It sounds good, and I know there was a tremendous amount of paperwork to get done, and I think getting that in, obviously they're gonna review all of it. We have the money approved for the feasibility study, so, looks like we're in good shape.
I think
Say
so.
a lot of work to be done,
I
but,
think so.
great.
A lot of work to be done.
Okay,
I'm excited.
any other questions? New business, grade 6, 2010 project adventure trip. I think this is maybe the 4th or 5th year that we offered this trip for incoming 6th graders, so Dr. Mandel, do you want to do this?
It is a trip you've approved before. It's in-state, it's not an overnight stay, but Mr. Forche wanted to bring it to the committee because they have acted on it before, and also because the cost of the trip is $120 a student. I spoke with him at length about this last Thursday. He has assured me that there is scholarship money for students who might need assistance in paying for the trip. And the consensus of the, especially the 6th grade teachers, is that this is a very important trip that these kids go on. There's a lot of team building and trust building and that kind of stuff. We certainly recommend that the trip be approved as presented.
It's a great trip. My son participated, and it does get a lot of kids involved in things that you've never seen certain kids involved in before, and it does really bring the kids together for that, that day that they're out there, and hopefully it carries over into the school year. It is a $120 cost per student. Again, I know Mr. Bowers, and I agree with him. If we had the money, always says we should be paying for these kinds of things because we're making them part of the curriculum.
For the record, I don't agree with him on that.
I understand that.
But it is one of our goals.
Yes, it is one of our goals to eventually find that pot of gold somewhere and be able to fund these trips. Because it does put a burden on families.
It does,
But
but once we highlighted this as an issue, I think it's really great that we've always had the administrators and parents come to us with alternatives that are, for the kids who can't go, that are equally educational. I think that's a good method.
This trip is the one that brings the 3 different schools
Right.
into one school.
Right.
And kind of gets them to know new people. And the reports back that I have had on it is that it's extremely positive.
same here. I've not heard one negative report on this trip in the 4 or 5 years that we've had it. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the Project Adventure trip for our 6th grade in September of 2010.
So moved.
Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Next.
The last meeting, if you'll remember, I said that Ms. Willis had talked to me about proposing changes of titles to the three of the central office positions, and that she would be here tonight to discuss them. And I put the little job descriptions and the new titles in your packet. And so, again, I yield to my colleague across the way here to explain this, because I can't figure it out at all.
I got scared, I'm renaming, I thought it might not be Carl Nelson anymore.
I thought, we thought you had to change his name to like
But it
Bob
might be
Jones
Jeff
or,
Smith or something.
yeah, something like that.
Adam Smith.
Yeah.
You wouldn't mind me now.
Kathleen?
Thank you. Well, this came out of a review of some of the documents that I've been taking a look at since being appointed to the superintendency. First, I started taking a look at the organizational chart that was done in July of '08, and I just took a look at who was doing what. And it became apparent to me that the director of curriculum and technology and the business manager are doing all kinds of have all kinds of responsibilities within their role that are broader than the current title. So then I, of course, met with Carl and I met with Pam, and I got a better sense of some of the responsibilities that they have. I took a look at the job descriptions that you already have in place, and it became even more apparent that the scope of their responsibilities are not truly reflected in the naming of the positions at this particular time. So I started to think, is there any consideration to be given to what we do say they are responsible for as members of the central office team? So as we went through the hiring of the Pupil Personnel Services Director, again, I saw the title and I said, well, we have a Director of Pupil Personnel Services already in place. And then I took a look at this new position that we are hiring for that Pam Bodwin previously held for curriculum and technology. And I started taking a look at the responsibilities that I had listed on the proposal that I gave to you, that it's not only curriculum instruction assessment and instructional technology, but it's professional development, it's home education, it's Title IX, it's the grants, the induction mentor program that's very important, as you well know, when bringing new personnel into the district. All special programs and committees, and she also acted as the liaison to DESE. So I started thinking it's broader than just curriculum and instructional technology. So to be honest, I started taking a look at other job advertisements that are out in the field at this particular time, and I saw titles such as Director of Academic Services or Director of Educational Services. I'd like to say this is my own idea, but it's not. I borrowed this title from another district. And then, of course, after I had a conversation with Kyle, it became very clear to me that he's responsible for much more than budget development and oversight and management, and everything that's listed on here in terms of payroll, personnel, transportation, building and grounds, food services, his favorite statewide reports, and again, as the liaison to DESE for finance. It became clear that, again, he has a lot of responsibilities. So in line with taking a look at what are some of the other names of those kinds of positions that are in the field, I came across Director of Finance and Operations. So I just bring this to you for your consideration in thinking about recognizing the broadening responsibilities that central office personnel do have as they perform lots of kinds of activities in order to run an efficient and an effective school district. It is a small district, and so these people wear many, many hats, well beyond the scope of what others who hold their positions in broader districts and larger districts hold. So I put it on the table for your consideration.
I just question, these activities that are under each position,
Yes.
that's what they're currently doing?
That's correct.
And that's what you anticipate them continuing doing?
That's correct.
So it's not a change in activities or roles, right? It's just,
That's correct.
And therefore doesn't have a financial implication.
That is correct.
At this time, no. This makes perfect sense to me, I don't.
I got no
have a
problem with it.
with
I move that we adopt this.
I second
Motion by Mr. Bowers, second by Ms. Teddy.
Now, the other two positions were empty. Does Kyle have to reapply for this, or is he still in there, or what? Is there some kind of trick going on here?
It's
No.
right there.
I think you're all set, Carl.
We could rename him Captain Nelson, or just thinking of
Yeah.
more appropriate.
More appropriate names,
Yeah.
yes. So we have a motion and a second. Admiral Nelson. I think I've heard that before.
That
Um,
connotation will not
no.
go there.
Okay, no further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. See how easy we are?
Thank you.
Okay.
At least at this meeting.
Trump saying, "We never
I
did that."
know, David Troughton is sitting there going, I never would have gotten that by them that easily. Procurement procedures discussion. Carl, when I saw this on the agenda, I was jumping up and down, I can't wait to get to it. So, I was gonna move it up to number 1 on the
We're trying
agenda.
to take a nap.
Yeah. So, Mr. Nelson,
Thank you, and
Please.
I promise to be brief, given the current climate in the room. But,
Keep it out, keep it out.
you know, as I see the red folder coming around, it makes me realize that every few years, it's probably important to
Change the
remind us
color
all,
of the folder.
yeah, that too, why we do that, and some of the background to that, particularly as the summer comes. You know, we have a new member and some kind of new members, and it's, I think, might be helpful to give a little background to the whole bill warrant process. And I would like a couple of minutes to do so. If you look at your packet, there's a little sheet in there with a pie chart. And what's contained in that little bill warrant that comes around every week is the bills that the business office has to pay on a weekly basis. School committee policy requires that 3 school committee persons sign the warrants. That, if you've ever wondered why we do that, it's because of your policy. In addition, school committee policy requires that you sign the weekly payroll warrant. And that's also in there. If you don't sign the payroll warrant, we don't get paid. If you don't sign the bill warrant, our vendors don't get paid. And in the summer, I would appreciate in advance your continuing cooperation in helping us out, because we generally are able to distribute those at school committee meetings, but during the summer, we have a little more difficulty because we don't have as many school committee meetings, and you'll all be getting panicked calls from time to time from members of our office to get the third signatures in our timely fashion so that we can pay the bills. So please excuse us when you get those calls as the summer goes by. Always feel
Do we have a
free.
ranking of who gets called first? I'm gonna trade.
I know who
Nominate
gets called
myself.
first.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mel.
The current chairman is number 1 on the list, and then I don't know how it goes from there, but
I'm not saying, but we sure do appreciate you coming in a lot, and that.
That's when you get working at home. That's when you work at home, and or you're retired, right?
I
You
work in
get-
Worcester.
You
There
get
go.
calls, right, you get calls first, that's all right.
But just to take a minute to look at this sheet, I think it's important to kind of understand that when you look at the school budget, 81% of the dollars we spend are spent on salaries, and only 19% are spent on expenses. And I think it goes to, it's reasonable then to understand why our discretionary spending is rather limited. Because of that 19%, which incidentally relates to about $4 million, of that 19%, much of those dollars are fixed for expenses that we don't have a lot of discretion over. I just want to touch on those quickly as we went. And another thought, as we know, as we begin to put together each year's budget, when we are considering budget cuts, you can kind of see the challenge we face, because when only 19% of it is expenses and 81% is payroll, you're realizing that when you're cutting budget, you're necessarily having to consider personnel, because the 19% that's remaining is getting increasingly difficult to cut back on. So, moving down the sheet, when you look at that piece of the pie that relates to the 19% of expenses, let's break that down a little bit further. And as I walk through this, I also want to comment on how do we make our choices? How do we decide upon what vendors we select? How do we make selections? And how do we try to get the most for our money as we progress through? So of that 19%, about half of it, or 45%, which is a little over $2 million, relates to special education funding. So once again, you're starting to see, gee, when you're trying to cut that 19%, it's not easy. That special education funding is primarily in 3 categories. It's tuition to private schools, it's tuition to collaboratives, and it's transportation. And you might say, well, how do you arrive at the prices that you pay for those services? The tuitions to private schools, the costs are set by the state. So there's no negotiation, it's straight and clear what it's going to be. The tuition costs to the collaboratives, the costs are set by the board of directors for the 2 collaboratives that we are members of, those being Seam Collaborative and North Shore Collaborative. And the board of directors for those 2 collaboratives are our superintendents, who meet frequently to govern the costs and expenses of the 2 collaboratives. So the tuition costs there are set by us, if you will. Thirdly, the transportation piece of special education is a bid activity.